Shannon Sharpe took to social media and defended the Ravens offensive line while blaming Lamar Jackson for the Ravens' struggles. We talk about what happened, what he said, and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, as always, making us your first listen each and every day and just a part of your day in general. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on. In audio form, turn those notifications on as well. Follow along, subscribe over there. Same show, both audio and video. We do 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage here, Monday through Friday, plus bonus episodes. We have live editions after the game, instant reaction shows. We're doing pre-game episodes now, so a lot in store here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are here on a midweek edition of the show. It is Wednesday, officially moving into Cowboys week, which is going to be a part of what we talk about on the show today, just in terms of how the Ravens can kind of move on here. But also a part of the show because Shannon Sharpe took to social media and defended the Ravens offensive line for some reason, while also just blaming Lamar Jackson. And it kind of made him look foolish. And look, and we know it's been in the news recently. This is, we're not talking about that situation. We're talking about a different situation with Shannon Sharpe here, but got into it with Ravens fans. I mean, he got into it with them, and we're going to talk about what he had to say because I don't know where this comes from. What we do with these types of conversations here on this show is we look at the comments and then we kind of branch off into another conversation more generally about what happens, while also, of course, bringing in the opinion of the person we're talking about. So Shannon Sharpe's going to be the subject today. We'll talk about why Lamar keeps getting blamed, which in my opinion is pretty ridiculous. And then we'll talk about Todd Monken, John Harbaugh being stubborn and why it is certainly a concern for this Ravens team. So we'll get into all of that again. We just started up doing graphics here on Locked On Ravens on the video side of things. So audio form, I still talk over the graphics, so you still are able to hear everything that I have to say. But in video form, just trying to wrap it up into a full show. Sometimes we'll have a bunch of graphics. Other times we'll have no graphics. But it's a really cool thing, and seemingly the response so far has been awesome. So let's just get into it here. Let's talk about Shannon Sharpe and what he had to say. Really, I was surprised from what we saw here. I didn't really necessarily understand, or I guess I didn't understand it then. I don't understand it now, really, but I didn't understand where it came from at first. I was just like, oh, okay, this is happening. And we know the Ravens offensive line has been a huge contention point. We've talked about it here on the show. It's no secret. It's no secret that, the Ravens offensive line is not been up to standard whatsoever, particularly a few different players, right? I think you can place more blame on a Daniel Falele than you can on a Linderbaum or Ronnie Stanley, right? But we talked about how this group has a direct impact on Lamar Jackson, direct impact on Derrick Henry in the running game, and just how things are run. And really, I mean, Shannon took to social media and just like it was Ravens fan after Ravens fan after Ravens fan. So this all started because a Ravens fan ended up listening to Shannon Sharpe with Stephen A. Smith talking about the Ravens and, the Ravens losing their offensive lineman, and Shannon expects Lamar to be like he was last year. They lost several players, and Shannon said, well, look, everyone loses players. Win, it's Lamar. Lose, it's the offensive line is off, play calling, coaching. You want MVP behind that offensive line with that coach. We don't make excuses. Thanks for watching. Already wrong. He's already wrong here. He did not win MVP behind that offensive line. He won it behind two of those guys, but they lost 60% of their line. I mean, it's just objectively false. It's objectively false. And I mean, even when Lamar wins, sometimes they put the praise on other players. I'm not saying they don't put it on Lamar because that happens plenty. Don't get me wrong. When they lose, it can be on other people not named Lamar. It can be on other positions not named Lamar, but I'll take you back. Remember that Pittsburgh Steelers game? Remember when Lamar's receivers had 7 drops? Who got the blame for that loss? By a lot of national media pundits, including people on ESPN, including Stephen A. Smith. It was Lamar Jackson. Is Lamar Jackson worth the money when Lamar lost? So already in this, we're nearly not into everything we have to talk about here. Already just false claim here after false claim here. He's talked about the Chiefs offensive line. The left tackle got benched for the Chiefs, this, that, and the other. And Shannon said that, look, he didn't blame Lamar and Stephen A. didn't blame Lamar. Stephen A. did. Shannon might not have, but Stephen A. absolutely did blame Lamar. We talked about that on yesterday's show. So that is also not true. But then it was about, 2 of the 5 offensive linemen were starters last year, right? The Ravens fan brought that up. And Lamar's not without fault, the fan said, but at least do some research first is what they told Shannon. And Shannon said Lamar wasn't the question. Most disappointing team was. And look, if you want to call the Ravens the most disappointing team so far, go right ahead. I wouldn't stop you. But, we're not – this thing about, Shannon's saying the Ravens are the only team that lost players, ha, ha, ha. No, Shannon's saying that sarcastically. Like, oh, yeah, the Ravens are the only team that lost players. No, they're not. And I understand that, right? But you have to look at it from a whole picture. And then he started saying, well, was that the offensive line that built the 10-point lead? Was, that offensive line helped the Ravens build the 10-point lead. And, everybody was saying there were 3 new starters on the offensive line. And Shannon's saying 3 new starters helped build a 10-point lead, not one complaint when the Ravens were up 10 about the offensive line. This one is the most egregious. This one is I looked at this and my jaw kind of dropped. I was like, what? Not one complaint when the Ravens were up 10 about the offensive line. We've been talking about this offensive line for months on this show. For months. And it's all this stuff about how, the offensive line lost 3 starters. The offensive line is inexperienced. Did the Ravens do enough to replace their offensive line? It's this and that and the other. And then Shannon's saying, oh, no one's complaining about the offensive line. Right? And then he ended up saying that, the other teams, like the Jaguars, the Chargers, whoever, don't have a 2-time MVP is their quarterback. He's judged and held to a higher standard, which I do agree with. I don't think that's wrong. I think he's correct on that. But we've seen this time and time again where, he is held to a standard which should be happening. But when there is reason to not blame him for something, he still finds a way to get blamed anyway. Because we can say Lamar wasn't perfect on Sunday against the Raiders. I've said that. He wasn't perfect. But he is so far from the reason they lost. He's so far from the reason they lost. And we'll get into it a bit more in the second part of the show. But, the fact that we're talking about with Shannon here, the offensive line helped build the 10-point lead. The offensive line is the big reason they lost outside of the coaching and some other stuff. The offensive line is going to be a huge issue this season. The offensive line has been talked about forever. So, look, I get it. Like, for Shannon and a bunch of other national media pundits, you can't sit there and watch all 32 teams. You just can't. It's not realistic. Do a deep dive on 32 teams on that short of a turnaround. But I mean, at least get the points, right? You don't have to watch all 32 teams in depth, but just to know the key points on things. And that's why, I'm really proud to be a part of this network here on the Locked On Podcast Network, because everybody has a specific team they cover. Everybody does deep dives, and we can analyze that. It's different. I do work on national shows. I do work on national shows on this network. And my goal is to try to, even if I can't watch hours of film on every single team, I at least make sure that I am up to date on what's going on, the pulse of the team, the pulse of the fan base. And so when you're out there, and then again, if I don't know something, I don't go out there and I don't try to talk about it like I know what it is. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Where if Shannon had a pulse on the team and a pulse on the fan base and a pulse on what was going on, he would understand that the offensive line is a huge issue and not the offensive line that built 10-point leads. They have a lot of work to do on that offensive line. They have a lot of changes to make on that offensive line. And, I mean, look, Shannon had a great playing career. He's a Hall of Famer. He knows a lot about the game. But it's situations like these where I think a lot of people get riled up about it because he's speaking on something that if you do watch this team, if you are a fan of this team, you understand that, yes, Lamar can be held to a higher standard, but he also shouldn't be blamed for things just because he has won 2 MVPs. I think he's blamed for things because he's won 2 MVPs. That higher standard thing is fine, but don't just blame a guy for a loss because he's held to that standard. Hold him to the standard when he truly deserves to be held to the standard. Hold him to the standard when he has a 3-interception game, not the 1 interception that bounced off Rashod Bateman's hands and it was running for his life the entire game and still had them almost in that game to win. And I mean, they were in the game. They blew the lead. So Lamar wasn't perfect, but the offensive line here, that's the much bigger storyline, but we're still seeing these things happen with Lamar Jackson. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll continue talking about Lamar Jackson somehow getting the blame, and I knew it was coming somehow, but it's so predictable at this point. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by DoorDash. And for me, football, I love that it's finally back, which means it's time to order your favorite game day food, snacks, and drinks on DoorDash without missing a play. So there was this one time I showed up to my friend's house for just watching football game day. We were going to have the full, marathon, and there was no food. There was no food. And I'm like, what are we doing here? So we got DoorDash. We got it all figured out. DoorDash came to the rescue there. And game day essentials for me has to be, got to have the drinks and the food on deck, got to have the snacks, even the extra batteries for the remote. A remote has died on me before, and I haven't had extra batteries, and I was stuck on a channel, and it wasn't good for game day. So for me, the ultimate spread, you can get desserts in there. Obviously, this drink, snacks, food, 100% as well. And if you want to talk about maybe comparing the Ravens to a game day essential, Tabasco, that they have some spice to them, they have some kick to them. But if you want to go the Old Bay, Maryland flavor on that for the comparison, I do not blame you whatsoever. Use promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 plus on your first order. Limited time offer. Terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 plus to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. And the show is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And for me, I love going on FanDuel, seeing all that they have to offer. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon on a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. So the Ravens and Cowboys game in week 3, Ravens actually open up as 1.5-point favorites in that game. So if you like that line, head over to FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. We're back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this midweek edition of the show on Wednesday. Thank you to everybody again for tuning in today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day and just a part of your day in general. In video form, we're almost up to 8,000 subscribers, and it's been incredible building up the video community and also incredible building up the audio community as well. It's the same show, both audio and video. So if you want to listen one day, watch another day, you're not missing out on any content here. If you're an everydayer, appreciate you tuning in each and every day. If you're somewhere in the middle between an everydayer and a new listener, thank you for tuning in again. And if you're a new listener, welcome in. Hopefully you stay a while here. Let's continue our conversation about Lamar Jackson, about the offensive line. 2 very big storylines in Baltimore, if I do say so myself. And going back to Shannon just for a little bit here. I mean, look, we mentioned earlier in the first segment about, well, the Chiefs. Shannon was talking about, the Chiefs had the same problem, and even last season, they had that offensive line play, and then on Sunday, the left tackle got benched. Well, guess what? Their offensive lineman got benched. That's what the Ravens want, or at least the Ravens fans want. The organization is going to do their own thing, but the Ravens fans, what we've all been clamoring for, what everybody's been clamoring for is for the organization to make that move, to bench Daniel Falele, to put in Roger Rosengarten full-time, to put in Ben Cleveland. So the Chiefs are doing what Ravens fans want the Ravens to do. And, that's just, it's the reality of the offensive line is a key contention point. But, again, you're congratulating the Chiefs for benching a guy. Yeah, that's great. But the offensive line is a whole issue for the Ravens right now. And again, Lamar just seems to be getting the brunt of it. I mean, Jason Kelce on ESPN before Monday Night Football talked about Lamar and him not being disciplined enough. Stephen A blamed Lamar, which again, I have no idea how Shannon, Stephen A didn't blame Lamar. It's out there. There's a clip out there that he absolutely did. And so we can bring up Lamar's stats through 2 weeks, by the way, because we can add some context to this. So here's Lamar Jackson among quarterbacks through week 2. He is number 1 in total yards, number 1 in rushing yards, number 4 in passing first downs, number 5 in passing yards. He's tied for 5th in both passing yards per game and incompletions. Those are some pretty solid stats if you ask me. Not every stat is perfect for Lamar, right? He's towards the lower part in net yards per attempt in general and completion. He's in the middle of the pack there. But hey, what's been one of the biggest contention points of Lamar over the course of his career for people who are trying to talk down on him? Oh, he doesn't throw for a bunch of passing yards. So, no. He's number 5 in passing yards. He's number 5 in passing yards. So that argument is out. Total yards, passing yards, rushing yards, he's number 1. Rushing yards, he's number 1. Lamar's not playing badly this season. He's not playing badly this season, but he's still getting the blame. And look, it always will fall some level on the quarterback. And with Lamar, Shannon saying the higher standard thing, it's always going to be natural that happens, right? It's always going to be natural. But Lamar's not having the ball bounce off of his hands for an interception. Lamar's not blocking for himself on that offensive line. There are some throws he's missed this year. There are a couple big ones in week 1, a couple in week 2. But to say that, this is a Lamar thing, say it's a Lamar thing in the AFC Championship when he didn't play ball enough. That's fine. We can say it's a Lamar thing then. And Lamar deserves a good amount of that blame, which obviously a lot of it does fall back on the coaching staff, which, hey, guess what, has been a theme. But I don't know. It's just this continuous cycle. And I know a lot of people are tired of it. But that's why I wanted to provide context. And with that Chiefs thing, with benching the offensive lineman, maybe that would help Lamar out. Well, John Harbaugh talked about Ben Cleveland and did not mince words, said if Ben had earned the job, he'd be the starting right guard. You look at the tape, he didn't beat out Daniel, meaning Daniel Falele. Ben knows what he needs to do if he wants playing time. Our evaluation right now is Daniel outplayed Ben, just facts, straight up. So we went over that quote yesterday, pulled up that graphic yesterday, and we had Kadri Ismail on the show, and he said, this is Ben Cleveland's in the John Harbaugh doghouse. And kind of goes hand in hand with our final segment here, where I think there's some level of stubbornness going on within this organization, particularly with John Harbaugh, a little bit with Todd Monken as well. And so for Lamar, I think he looks a lot better in some aspects this season. With the offensive line playing the way it is, he's getting out into space more. He's taking what's there. I don't think he's forcing as much. I think that's a really good thing that I'm seeing out of him this season, at least through 2 games. But, that graphic I pulled up about Lamar's stats and those stats I just read off, it's not like we're talking about a player that is, number 17 in passing yards and a guy that has 5 interceptions through 2 games. He's done what he can, hasn't been perfect, and there's always room for improvement. But to me, if you want to blame Lamar for things, okay. But there's an order. There's an order of things. And Lamar is far down on that list right now. So coming up in the final part of the show, we will talk about John Harbaugh, Todd Monken, their stubbornness. We'll get into what needs to change as they look ahead to Dallas in week 3, as Shannon Sharpe made clear that it is Dallas week, and it is 100% true. So stay tuned. A lot to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events no matter what kind, and I have a ton of great memories from sports, music, comedy, theater events that I've attended in the past, and I love looking forward to making a couple new memories each year. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Plus, Gametime had a great 50% off Labor Day offer for Diamondbacks and Dodgers. So for the Ravens and Cowboys, that's a game that is going to be on the road for Baltimore, but they're coming home to play Buffalo in prime time. So if you want to browse through those seats on Gametime Picks, you absolutely should, because they have super deals and a bunch of other tiers of deals as well. And the app has a bunch of great features like Gametime Picks, all-in pricing, which you have to have toggled on to use that feature, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Gametime ticket coverage, and so much more. Plus, the app is super easy to use and navigate. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDO on NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. We return our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here on Wednesday with you. Really appreciate everybody again for the support here on the channel, on the show. And an exciting season for the Ravens has suddenly become a worrisome one, but hopefully they'll be able to turn it around against Dallas in week 3. Part of that is going to have to fall on the coaching staff. In fact, a lot of it is. We've seen stubbornness from this organization through 2 weeks here. And I mean, we can be honest about it. I think this has to do with effort here for Ben Cleveland. You know, there have been multiple reports and rumors that have come out of Baltimore training camp and practices over the last couple of years that maybe Ben Cleveland doesn't put in a lot of effort. And that kind of honestly was supported in John Harbaugh's answer about Ben Cleveland, because he said Ben knows how he has to play, how he has to practice. And that gives me an inkling that, you know, for John Harbaugh, maybe he has this, I don't want to call it a vendetta, but maybe Ben Cleveland isn't that doghouse because he hasn't practiced hard enough in instances. But, you know, the Ravens have had guys on their team who haven't really been like hard practice guys or guys that give their all. Like, I know John Harbaugh is a big effort guy, like effort coach, you know, show effort and you'll get rewarded for it. But there have been a couple of guys that over the course of Harbaugh's tenure haven't necessarily showed up with all this effort, but still get decently consistent playing time. And that does include guys who go out there for just a year and then they kind of wash out. But I think the biggest example of this is Marcus Peters. You know, Marcus Peters got into a couple spats with John Harbaugh, but he was still allowed to play in the games. You know, Marcus Peters is a better player, or was a better player for the Ravens than Ben Cleveland right now. But, I mean, are you kind of like picking and choosing here? If you're John Harbaugh, I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but it is clear that Daniel Falele is not the right man for the right guard job. It is clear that they need to put Roger Rosengarten as their full-time right tackle. And seemingly they're not going to do either. Now, there could be a situation here because John Harbaugh, in his press conference, they're not giving anything away. John Harbaugh is a very tactically, you know, he likes the tactical advantages, right? So he could just be saying all this, and then they're going to roll out there with Rosengarten full-time, no rotation, and then a new right guard. Very easily could happen because we've seen John Harbaugh do stuff like that in the past. I am not putting that past this organization whatsoever. But a lot of people, majority of people, have been complaining about this offensive line. The Ravens kind of made their bed here with this. You can't really address the offensive line position during the season because everybody needs offensive linemen. You think the Ravens need offensive linemen? Did you see the Raiders block on Sunday? You see the Bears block for Caleb Williams on Sunday night? Everyone needs quality offensive linemen. It's not just the Ravens. And that's why there is such a premium on these players, both on the trade market, where usually you're overpaying for mediocre talent, or in free agency, where you're shelling out tons of money for guys that maybe don't deserve that money. So they're going to have to roll with what they have and just hope it gets better. We have seen some levels of improvement from Andrew Voorhees, even though it hasn't necessarily been exactly clean for him. But Falele is just the same stuff over and over. He's not athletic enough to get out into space. He doesn't take the correct angles. He gets juked out by safeties. He's lunging forward. He's not getting his hands on guys. That's one of the big draws for Falele. When he gets his hands on guys, it's hard to disengage, but he's not getting his hands on guys. The right side of that offensive line is a huge issue. It's been a key proponent on the Ravens' 2 losses here, and has all of a sudden put them in a potential 0-3 hole. And you have to, if you're in an 0-3 hole, your season's in huge jeopardy. Huge jeopardy. It's tough. Season's not over, but that's really tough. 0-2 is even really tough. Since the playoffs expanded, since that record, the 18th week, 2 teams who started 0-2 have made the playoffs. 32 started 0-2. 2 have made the playoffs, I believe. Cincinnati in 2022 and Houston in 2023. Those are the 2. So, going to have to be a trend breaker there if you're the Ravens. But John Harbaugh's stubbornness, this organization, call it loyalty, call it stubbornness, whatever you want. Sometimes it's really good. It really works out for him. Other times like this can possibly do regular season. So they're going to have to figure out something fast with that. But also Todd Monken. I don't think I've seen enough adjustments out of Todd Monken. I thought we saw progress last season, obviously, but we're kind of seeing the same old with him a little bit, where the offense starts fast and then falls off a cliff, or it starts slow and they pick up a little bit towards the end of the game. I'd like to see a more consistent effort, them work vertically. They're not taking a ton of deep shots. I know that hasn't been necessarily a staple of Lamar's game over these last couple of years, but you got to try it. Go take that 40-yard shot, 35-yard shot. Do it early. Try to establish some level of hey, we can beat you deep. Now you got to worry about that. The Ravens ran play action on 12.8% of their plays. Shout out, I saw Spencer Schultz put that stat out, a couple others as well, but 12.8% of their plays. Play action was a huge proponent of how they scored that touchdown to Zay Flowers, how they picked up multiple chunk gains. Defenses they have so many assignments to worry about off play action plays, and that can work into your run game, and the Ravens just aren't utilizing it. They're going away from it at weird times. They're trying to work into other guys at weird times. It's just like there is a simple path, and they're just not using it. I think they're trying to be too cute at times. They're trying to outsmart the other team. Just be simple. Use your identity. It's okay. If it wins you a football game, I don't care how you win the football game. We can talk about good wins, bad wins, ugly losses, pretty losses, but just win the game. Use your identity. That, to me, is exactly what this team needs to do. On the defensive side of the ball, of course, we've seen a mixed bag for the first 2 games of Zach Orr's defensive coordinator tenure. But again, I see Zach Orr getting a lot of blame. It's like Lamar. If you want to blame Zach Orr for some stuff, sure, he hasn't been perfect either, but he is also very far down on the list of people who need to be blamed. And this honestly is kind of the Mike Macdonald trajectory. Mike Macdonald struggled a little bit in those first 2 games, right? That Miami game it's awful, but he bounced back from that, and the rest is history. So the Ravens' defensive stats here through week 2, their rushing defense, they are number 1 in all facets. Number 1 in yards per attempt, 2.7. That includes holding Las Vegas to 1.6 on Sunday. Number 1 in total yards. They haven't even allowed 100 yards on the ground. 99 yards allowed on the ground for the Ravens defense. Been exceptional for them. That defensive front is wreaking havoc. Passing defense, that secondary, not so much. 26th in yards per attempt with 7. And they are dead last in the NFL in total passing yards with 514. So kind of the opposite. Where a lot of people were worried about the 1, pass rush, but 2, just some of the defensive front in general, not necessarily the defensive linemen, but just like, oh, how's that line going to hold up with, Odafe Owe taking on a bigger role? Is Calvin Noy going to have it? Can Travis Jones break out? Is Michael Pierce going to take a step back? That line has been incredible. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's the secondary that has struggled. I think Roquan and Kyle Hamilton have had uncharacteristic starts this season, Marcus Williams as well. So if they can get their stars going, and I think that's more of a when than an if question for me, I expect the secondary to get back on track, but you have CeeDee Lamb, you got to go face in Dallas in week 3. Devontae Adams just kind of did it to you in week 2. So little bit of a mixed bag defensively. Great run defensive team so far, but obviously the pass defense has not been up to snuff. So hopefully Baltimore can just break out of some of these habits they've had in these first couple of weeks, hopefully make some personnel changes and go get a win in Dallas because they need it. We're already talking about a must-win game in September. It's a little scary, but they still have an opportunity to write their season. But if they lose, scary conversations are going to have to happen here. Not that they already aren't happening here on Locked On Ravens. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show again. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow along in audio form as well for 5 days a week Ravens coverage. If you have a friend or a family member who is a Ravens fan, wants Ravens coverage daily, be sure to send them our way. Here, come tomorrow, more Ravens content as we continue to dive further into that Ravens and Cowboys Week 3 matchup. Stay tuned. See you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.